The Korthak had ruled the galaxy's battlefields for 3,000 years, and we had never once met our equals in the art of death. Our homeworld of Brutus Prime was a nightmare of perpetual storms, crushing gravity that would liquefy most sentient bones, and predators that hunted in packs of hundreds. We emerged from this hell already evolved for war. 8 feet of corded muscle wrapped around titanium-dense bones, with reflexes that could catch plasma bolts and claws that could rend starship hulls. When the galaxy's various species first encountered us, they dubbed us the Apex, the ultimate expression of evolutionary lethality. We wore that title with pride. For millennia, we served as the galaxy's enforcers, peacekeepers, and, when necessary, its executioners. No rebellion lasted long once the Korthak deployment ships arrived. No pirate fleet could stand against our battle-forged warriors. Even the most militaristic species would submit rather than face us in open combat. We were death incarnate, and we had built a civilization on that simple, terrible truth. Commander Thexvol stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Apex's Fury, his black eyes scanning the tactical display with the casual interest of a predator sizing up prey. The latest assignment was routine: investigate reports of an unknown species that had begun expanding aggressively in the Outer Rim territories. 3 established civilizations had already fallen to these newcomers, and the Galactic Council had grown concerned enough to dispatch us. "Unknown species," Thexvol growled to his second-in-command, War Captain Drachmon. "As if there could be any species we do not already know and measure." Drachmon's tusks gleamed as he bared them in what passed for a Korthak smile. "The reports are curious, Commander. The fallen civilizations speak of warriors who fight without honor, who refuse proper combat challenges, who somehow achieve victory despite being physically inferior." Inferior? Thexvol's voice carried the rumbling undertone that indicated amusement. "Everything is inferior to Korthak." The view screen flickered to life, displaying the testimony of a survivor from the Zephyrian Empire, a proud warrior culture that had lasted 8 centuries before falling to these mysterious invaders in less than 6 months. "They don't fight like warriors at all," the scarred Zephyrian general was saying, his mandibles clicking with barely controlled rage. "They use tricks, deceptions. They strike from impossible distances with weapons that ignore our armor. When we challenge them to honorable single combat, they laugh and call in orbital strikes. They have no concept of martial honor." Thexvol's lips pulled back, revealing rows of serrated teeth. The Zephyrians were decent fighters, not Korthak level, but respectable enough to have earned membership in the Warriors Coalition. If they had been reduced to this level of frustrated complaint, these newcomers clearly lacked any understanding of proper warfare. "Cowards, then," Drachmon observed. "Scavengers who prey on the weak and flee from true strength." "So it would seem." Thexvol gestured to the navigation officer. "Set course for the Terran sector. We will introduce these humans to the concept of apex predation." The journey to human space took 2 weeks, during which time Thexvol reviewed every scrap of intelligence the Council had managed to gather. The picture that emerged was puzzling. The humans appeared to be a relatively young species. They had only achieved interstellar travel within the last few centuries, making them practically children compared to civilizations like the Korthak. Yet somehow they had carved out a substantial territory and seemed to be expanding with a methodical efficiency that bordered on the mechanical. More troubling were the reports of their home world. Earth, they called it. The initial surveys suggested it was a mild, temperate world, pleasant by most standards, certainly nothing that would forge a warrior race. The gravity was laughably light, the climate stable, the predators small and manageable. By all rights, such a world should have produced a species of philosophers and merchants, not conquerors. "Perhaps they are simply numerous," suggested Senior War Chief Graktal during one of the tactical briefings. Quantity over quality. Many weak species have achieved temporary success through sheer numbers. Thexvol nodded thoughtfully. It was a possibility. The Korthak had faced swarm species before. The insectoid Velkar came to mind, with their billions of expendable drones. Such species could be formidable in the short term, but they invariably crumbled once you eliminated their breeding centers and command structures. "We shall see," Thexvol rumbled. "Ready the challenge protocols. If they are true warriors, they will accept honorable combat. If they are cowards..." He let the threat hang in the air, unfinished but perfectly clear. The edge of human space was marked by a series of monitoring stations. Sleek, geometric constructs that bore little resemblance to the organic curves favored by most galactic architecture. As the Apex's fury approached the border, Thexvol noted with approval that the humans had at least posted guards. 3 vessels moved to intercept. Small craft, barely larger than fighters, but they approached with a confidence that suggested either courage or ignorance. "Unknown vessel," came a transmission in passable galactic standard. "You are entering Terran space. Please state your business and prepare for customs inspection." Thexvol exchanged a look with Drachmon. Customs inspection? Of a Korthak dreadnought? "This is Commander Thexvol of the Korthak Empire," he transmitted back, allowing his full authority to color his voice. "I come bearing the mandate of the Galactic Council to investigate reports of aggressive expansion. You will escort us to your military command structure, where we will discuss the terms of your surrender." There was a pause. Then, impossibly, the human voice replied, with what sounded distinctly like laughter. "Yeah, that's not how this works, friend. You want to come into Terran space? You follow Terran regulations. We're uploading the forms now. Fill them out completely, submit them to the processing center, and you'll hear back in 7 to 10 business days." Thexvol stared at the communications console, his brain struggling to process what he had just heard. Regulations, forms, business days. Did they just... Drachmon began, his voice strangled with disbelief. "They are mocking us," Thexvol snarled, his claws extending involuntarily. "They dare to treat the Apex as if we were common merchants." He opened the channel again, letting his voice drop to the bone-deep rumble that had preceded the death of countless foes. "Human, I am Korthak. We are the apex predators of this galaxy. Your species has been summoned to account for its actions. You will comply, or you will be removed." Another pause. Then, "Look, I appreciate the whole dramatic villain thing you've got going on, but I'm going to need you to tone it down a notch. This is a family-friendly zone. Now, about those forms." The transmission cut out. For a long moment, the bridge of the Apex's fury was silent, except for the steady hum of the engines and the barely audible grinding of Thexvol's teeth. "Commander," the sensor officer called out, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm detecting weapons lock from all 3 human vessels." Thexvol's head snapped toward the tactical display. 3 small craft against a Korthak dreadnought. It should have been laughable. The Apex's fury was nearly a kilometer long, armored with quantum-locked battle plates and armed with enough firepower to sterilize a continent. What could 3 fighters possibly do? "They're targeting our engines," the sensor officer continued, a note of puzzlement in his voice. "Precision locks on the drive couplings and power distribution nodes." "Precision locks?" Drachmon leaned forward. "At this range?" "Through our countermeasures." "Confirmed, sir. Their targeting systems appear to be extremely sophisticated." Thexvol felt the first stirring of something he had not experienced in decades: uncertainty. The humans were not behaving like any species he had encountered. They showed no fear of the Korthak, no recognition of their status as apex predators. Instead, they seemed to be treating this entire encounter as a bureaucratic inconvenience. "Human vessels," he transmitted. You are addressing the chosen warriors of Brutus Prime. We have conquered 1,000 worlds and broken the backs of countless enemies. Stand aside or be destroyed. Okay, couple of things, came the reply, and Thexvol noted that the voice remained infuriatingly casual. First, threatening government officials is a felony in Terran space. Second, your 1,000-world claim is actually pretty impressive. We'll have to compare notes sometime. And third, you're currently outnumbered about 8,000 to 1, so maybe dial back the "be destroyed" rhetoric. 8,000 to 1. Thexvol looked at his sensors. There are 3 of you. Oh, you can only see 3 of us. That's adorable. The tactical display suddenly erupted with contacts. Ships materialized out of empty space as if they had been waiting there all along. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of vessels of every size and configuration. Sleek destroyers uncloaked beside the monitoring stations. Massive battleships shimmered into existence where moments before there had been nothing but vacuum. Fighter squadrons seemed to simply step out of invisibility, their formations so perfect they might have been drawn with a ruler. The Apex's fury found itself at the center of the largest military formation Thexvol had ever seen outside of a galactic war. Every weapon in the fleet was trained on his ship with a precision that spoke of targeting computers more advanced than anything in Korthak space. Now then, the human voice continued pleasantly, about those forms. Thexvol's worldview, built on 3 millennia of unquestioned supremacy, cracked like glass. In his peripheral vision, he could see his bridge crew struggling with the same cognitive dissonance. The humans had just deployed a fleet that could have challenged the entire Korthak armada, and they were using it to enforce customs regulations. Thexvol began, then stopped. For the first time in his adult life, he had no idea what to say. "Tell you what," the human continued, "since you seem like you're having a rough day, we'll expedite your application. Consider this your formal invitation to visit Earth. We'll even provide an escort. Wouldn't want you getting lost in all this traffic." A squadron of human ships detached from the formation, moving to flank the Apex's fury. Thexvol noted that they maintained perfect formation spacing while executing maneuvers that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. Their pilots were either supremely skilled or controlled by computers, with reaction times measured in nanoseconds. As they traveled deeper into human space, Thexvol began to understand that his initial assessment had been catastrophically wrong. This was not the territory of scavengers or cowards. Every system they passed showed signs of massive industrial development, orbital habitats that housed billions, defensive installations that could have held off fleets. The humans had not simply conquered their neighbors. They had absorbed them, integrated their technologies and populations into a growing colossus that spanned dozens of star systems. "Commander," Drakmon said quietly, "the fleet strength estimates in our files are wrong." Thexvol finished. "Completely, utterly wrong." The final approach to Earth revealed the true scope of human capabilities. The Sol system was a fortress the likes of which had never been seen in galactic history. Every asteroid had been converted into a weapons platform. The moons of the outer planets bristled with defense networks. Even the sun itself showed signs of modification. Vast solar collectors that fed power to installations whose purpose Thexvol could only guess at, and at the center of it all was Earth, that mild, pleasant world that by all rights should have produced nothing more dangerous than poets and gardeners. "Welcome to Terra," their escort leader announced as they entered orbit. "Please maintain current heading and velocity while we arrange for your diplomatic reception. And, Commander, you might want to update your databases. Your information on human capabilities appears to be somewhat out of date." Thexvol stared at the blue-green world below, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he thought he knew about Deathworlds and warrior species. How could such a peaceful-looking planet have produced beings capable of this level of military sophistication? The answer came as they were escorted to the surface. The human delegation that met them at the spaceport was led by a man who introduced himself as Admiral Daniel Adams, Terran Defense Force. He was tall by human standards, but still shorter than the smallest Korthak, with graying hair and eyes that held depths Thexvol had not expected to find in a species so young. "Commander Thexvol," Admiral Adams said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome to Earth. I understand you represent the Galactic Council." Thexvol clasped the offered hand, noting that the human's grip was firm, despite his apparent fragility. "I come to investigate reports of aggressive expansion by your species." Adams's expression remained neutral, but Thexvol caught something, a flicker of amusement, in those dark eyes. "Aggressive expansion. Yes, I can see how our recent activities might be interpreted that way. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more comfortable." They were led through the spaceport, and Thexvol found his assumptions being challenged at every turn. The humans around them moved with an efficiency that spoke of military discipline, but they showed no fear of the towering Korthak warriors. Children stared in open curiosity rather than terror. Elderly humans nodded politely as they passed. This was not the behavior of a prey species in the presence of apex predators. The conference room where they eventually gathered was unremarkable by most standards. A simple table, comfortable chairs, large windows overlooking a city that sprawled to the horizon. But Thexvol noted the subtle details. The walls that were probably armored, the furniture positioned to provide clear fields of fire, the decorative artwork that could conceal surveillance equipment. "So," Admiral Adams said once they were seated, "tell me about the Korthak." It was not the question Thexvol had expected. "We are the apex predators of the galaxy. For 3,000 years, we have maintained order through strength." "Apex predators," Adams repeated thoughtfully. "That's an interesting claim. What makes you apex predators, exactly?" Thexvol gestured to himself and his companions. "Look at us. We are evolved for combat. Our homeworld forged us in violence and survival. We are faster, stronger, more durable than any species in known space." Adams nodded slowly. "Physical superiority. That's certainly one definition of apex predation." He leaned back in his chair. "Would you like to know what humans consider apex predation?" Before Thexvol could answer, Adams touched something on the table's surface. The room's lights dimmed, and the windows became opaque. A three-dimensional display materialized above the table, showing what appeared to be a star map. "This is human space as it existed 5 years ago," Adams said. The display showed a modest cluster of systems, perhaps 30 worlds. "And this is human space today." The map expanded dramatically, encompassing nearly 100 systems. "As your records indicate, we have indeed been expanding rapidly, but here's what your records don't show." The display shifted, highlighting individual systems in different colors. Red indicates systems where we displaced hostile forces through military action. "How many red systems do you see, Commander?" Thexvol studied the map carefully. To his surprise, very few systems were marked in red, perhaps a dozen out of the 100 shown. "The rest?" he asked. "Blue indicates voluntary integration, species that chose to join us after observing our capabilities. Yellow represents systems we claimed after their original inhabitants had already been destroyed by others. Green marks worlds we terraformed from lifeless rocks." Adam's expression remained neutral. "We prefer not to fight when we can avoid it, Commander. It's inefficient." "Inefficient?" Drakmon spoke for the first time since they had arrived. "Combat is the purest expression of superiority. How can you call it inefficient?" Adams's eyes shifted to the war captain, and Thexavol felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. For just a moment, the human's mask of diplomatic courtesy slipped, revealing something underneath that reminded Thexavol uncomfortably of the look in a hunting predator's eyes. "Because, war captain," Adams said quietly, "when you fight, there's always a chance you might lose." The display changed again, this time showing tactical readouts from recent engagements. The Zephyrian Empire, the Draconic Hegemony, the Stellar Brotherhood, all proud warrior cultures, all now flying human flags. "Take the Zephyrians," Adams continued. "Excellent fighters, very honorable. They challenged us to single combat, ship to ship, winner take all. We agreed, of course." The display showed the engagement in question, a Zephyrian dreadnought facing off against a smaller human vessel. To Thexavol's trained eye, it should have been no contest. The Zephyrian ship was larger, more heavily armed, and crewed by a species bred for war. The human ship destroyed it in 17 seconds. "How?" Thexavol whispered. "We cheated," Adams said simply. "The Zephyrians brought their best ship and their finest crew to an honorable duel. We brought an experimental vessel equipped with weapons that technically didn't exist yet, crewed by a man who had spent the previous month in full immersion combat simulations, running that exact scenario 1,000 times." The display shifted to show the human vessel in detail. It was sleek, organic-looking, bristling with weapon systems that Thexavol didn't recognize. "Captain Jake Thomas," Adams continued, and Thexavol filed away the name. "Former test pilot, current commander of our advanced weapons program. We told him the fate of 2 civilizations hung on that single engagement, and that if he lost, billions would die. What do you think he did?" "He won," Thexavol said slowly. "He won," Adams agreed, "because Captain Thomas understood something that most warrior cultures never grasp. The only rule in survival is that there are no rules. Honor, fair play, sporting chance, these are luxuries that apex predators can't afford." The display vanished and the room's lighting returned to normal. Adams leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table's surface. "You see, Commander, humans aren't apex predators because we're the strongest or the fastest or the most durable. We're apex predators because we're the most adaptable. We learn, we innovate, we overcome. When we encounter something bigger than us, we build bigger weapons. When we face something faster, we build faster ships. When we meet something smarter..." Adams smiled, and Thexavol finally understood why the human crews had shown no fear. "We become smarter." "You're saying," Thexavol said carefully, "that humans are superior to Korthak?" "I'm saying," Adams replied, "that the concept of superiority is outdated. Every species has strengths. The Korthak are magnificent warriors, probably the finest individual combatants in the galaxy. But warfare isn't about individual combat anymore, Commander. It's about systems, logistics, technology, adaptation. It's about being willing to do whatever it takes to protect your people." Adams stood, moving to the window that now displayed a view of the cityscape beyond. "Would you like to know what happened to the Zephyrians after we defeated them?" Thexavol nodded, though he suspected he already knew. "We offered them a choice. They could continue fighting us, ship by ship, world by world, until their entire civilization was destroyed. Or they could join us as equals, contributing their martial traditions to our collective defense while gaining access to our technology and resources." Adams turned back to face the Korthak delegation. It took them exactly 4 hours to make their decision. And the others? The Draconic Hegemony lasted 6 hours. The Stellar Brotherhood held out for a full day. Very stubborn people. But they came around. Adams's expression grew serious. "Commander, I want to be very clear about something. We didn't conquer these civilizations. We recruited them. They saw what we offered and chose to be part of something larger than themselves. Thexvol felt the last of his certainties crumbling away. Everything he had believed about strength, about dominance, about the natural order of things was being systematically dismantled by this soft-spoken human who probably weighed less than Thexvol's arm. "What about us?" he asked finally. "What about the Korthak?" Adams returned to his seat, his expression thoughtful. "That depends on you, Commander. You can report back to the Galactic Council that humanity poses no threat to species that don't threaten us. You can recommend that we be granted full membership and recognition as a sovereign power, and then you can go home to your warrior culture and continue believing that physical strength makes you apex predators." Or, Adams's smile returned, but this time it held no warmth whatsoever. "Or you can try to enforce your will on us and discover just how far apex predation has evolved since you last updated your definitions." The silence that followed stretched for long minutes. Thexvol could hear his own heartbeat, could smell the tension musk of his companions. Finally, he spoke. "Admiral Adams, I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of this encounter." "Oh?" "We came here believing we were investigating a potential threat to galactic stability. Instead, it appears we have discovered the galaxy's new apex predators." Thexvol stood, executing a formal bow that was the highest honor his culture could bestow. "The Korthak request permission to learn from you." Adams's expression shifted to something that might have been surprise. "Learn what, exactly?" "How to survive in a galaxy where strength alone is no longer enough." For the first time since they had arrived, Admiral Adams's diplomatic mask dropped completely, revealing something that looked almost like relief. "Commander," he said, "I think that can be arranged. But first, let me introduce you to someone who can explain our methods better than I can." He touched his communications device. "Captain Thomas, could you join us in Conference Room 7? We have some new students for you." As they waited, Thexvol found himself studying the human admiral with new eyes. Adams was clearly older than most of his species' warriors, probably past his physical prime by human standards, yet he radiated a confidence that had nothing to do with muscle mass or reflexes. It was the confidence of a being who had never met a problem he couldn't solve, never faced an enemy he couldn't defeat. It was the confidence of a true apex predator. The door opened and Captain Jake Thomas entered. He was younger than Adams, with the lean build of a pilot and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When he looked at the Korthak delegation, Thexvol saw none of the fear or awe that aliens typically showed when meeting his species for the first time. Instead, Thomas studied them with the analytical gaze of a scientist examining interesting specimens. "Commander Thexvol," Adams said. "Captain Thomas. Jake, the commander here, wants to understand how we've managed to expand so rapidly. I thought you might walk him through some of our operational philosophies." Thomas nodded, taking a seat at the table. "Sure, though I should probably start with a question. What do you consider the most important factor in warfare?" "Superior force projection," Thexvol answered immediately. "The ability to bring overwhelming power to bear on your enemies." "Interesting." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "We used to think that way too, back when we were limited to a single world. But interstellar warfare changes the equation. When your enemies might be hundreds of light years away, force projection becomes a logistics problem more than a military one." The captain activated the room's display system, calling up what appeared to be a tactical simulation. "Let me show you something. This is a standard fleet engagement between two forces of roughly equal strength." The display showed red and blue icons maneuvering in three-dimensional space, exchanging fire, suffering losses. Traditional thinking says the side with better ships or more experienced crews wins. But watch what happens when we introduce human tactical doctrine. The simulation reset, but this time the blue forces, presumably representing humans, behaved differently. Instead of engaging in direct combat, they spread out, using hit-and-run tactics, targeting supply lines, avoiding decisive battles. The Red Force wins every direct engagement, Thomas continued, but they can't bring the Blue Force to battle. Meanwhile, Blue systematically destroys Red's ability to maintain operations. Ships run out of fuel, crews go without supplies, morale collapses. After 3 months of this, Red surrenders without ever losing a major battle. Drachmon leaned forward. "You call that honorable warfare?" Thomas's expression didn't change. "I call it effective warfare. The goal isn't to prove who's the better fighter, it's to achieve your objectives with minimum cost to your own people. Honor is a luxury you can afford after you've survived. But this strategy only works against honorable opponents," Thexeval pointed out. "What about enemies who use similar tactics? Then we adapt." Thomas called up another simulation, this one showing human forces facing enemies that employed the same asymmetric tactics. This is the Stellar Brotherhood conflict. They'd learned from observing our previous campaigns and tried to use our own methods against us. The simulation played out, showing a complex dance of feint and counterfeint, deception and misdirection. Both sides seemed evenly matched until suddenly the human forces shifted their entire strategy, abandoning subtlety for overwhelming direct assault. "The Brotherhood expected us to stick to guerrilla tactics," Thomas explained, "so we gave them exactly the opposite. Concentrated all our forces and hit their capital system with everything we had. They were so busy preparing for a long campaign that they never saw the knockout punch coming." Thexeval stared at the display, beginning to understand the magnitude of what he was witnessing. "You change your entire military doctrine based on what your enemies expect." "We change everything based on what the situation requires," Thomas corrected. "Tactics, strategy, technology, even our fundamental approach to conflict resolution. The only constant is adaptation." Admiral Adams activated another section of the display, showing what appeared to be a development timeline. "This is human military evolution over the past 5 years. Notice how our ship designs, weapon systems, and tactical doctrines change between each major engagement. The progression was staggering. Early human vessels looked crude and improvised compared to their galactic neighbors, but each successive generation showed dramatic improvements, incorporating technologies and design philosophies stolen, borrowed, or independently developed at a pace that should have been impossible." "How do you innovate so rapidly?" Thexeval asked. "We cheat," Thomas said with a grin. "Whenever we encounter a technology we don't understand, we reverse engineer it. When we meet a tactic we can't counter, we develop new counter-tactics. When we face an enemy we can't beat," he gestured to the Korthak delegation, "we recruit them." "But this implies," Drachmon said slowly, "that humans are constantly learning from their enemies." "Not just learning," Adams corrected, "becoming. Every species we encounter teaches us something new about warfare, about technology, about survival. We absorb those lessons and make them part of ourselves." Thomas nodded. "The Zephyrians taught us about honor and personal courage. The Draconics showed us how to coordinate large fleets. The Brotherhood demonstrated the value of intelligence networks. Each species we've allied with has made us stronger." Thexeval felt a chill of realization. "You're not just expanding your territory, you're expanding yourselves." "Now you're beginning to understand," Adams said quietly. "Humans aren't apex predators in spite of being physically inferior. We're apex predators because we're physically inferior. Every species in the galaxy is stronger than us in some way, so we had to become better at everything else." The display shifted again, showing a comprehensive analysis of human space. Resources, population, industrial capacity, military strength, all growing at exponential rates as new species and their capabilities were integrated into the human collective. "This is why we don't conquer," Thomas added. "Conquest gives you territory and slaves. Alliance gives you partners and teachers. One makes you larger, the other makes you better." Thexvol studied the data, his strategic mind automatically calculating implications. The humans weren't just building an empire, they were building a civilization that grew stronger with every addition, that learned and adapted faster than its opponents could respond. "You're going to absorb the entire galaxy," he said, not quite managing to keep the awe out of his voice. "Only the parts that want to be absorbed," Adams replied. "The rest can continue as they always have, as long as they don't threaten our people or our allies." "And if they do?" Thomas's smile turned predatory. "Then they get to discover what a real apex predator looks like." The meeting concluded with formal agreements for cultural and military exchanges. The Korthak would establish an embassy on Earth and send observers to study human tactical innovations. In return, human advisors would visit Brutus Prime to learn about Korthak warrior traditions and training methods. As Thexvol prepared to depart, Admiral Adams pulled him aside for a private conversation. "Commander, there's something else you should know, something that didn't come up in our official discussions." Thexvol waited, sensing that whatever Adams was about to say would be significant. "The expansion you've observed, the rapid technological development, the military innovations, all of that has been defensive in nature." "Defensive?" Adams's expression grew serious. "We've been preparing for something, Commander, something that's coming from beyond the galactic rim. Our deep space monitors have detected signatures that suggest a threat unlike anything the galaxy has faced before." Thexvol felt his blood chill. "What kind of threat?" "We're not entirely sure yet, but preliminary analysis suggests a technological civilization that makes our recent innovations look primitive by comparison. They're still years away, but when they arrive..." Adams paused. "Let's just say that the galaxy is going to need every advantage it can get. You're building an alliance network to face this threat." "We're building a family," Adams corrected. "Because when they get here, the old divisions between conqueror and conquered, predator and prey, apex and lesser, none of that will matter. There will only be those who stand together and those who fall alone." As the Apex's fury departed Earth's orbit, Thexvol found himself looking back at the blue-green world with new understanding. The humans had not simply challenged his species' claim to apex predator status, they had redefined what apex predation meant in a universe where survival depended on adaptation rather than strength. But Adams's final revelation cast everything in a new light. If the humans were this formidable when acting defensively, preparing for a threat they had only detected at extreme range, what were they preparing to face? And more importantly, would even their revolutionary approach to warfare be enough to stop it? The questions haunted Thexvol as human space fell away behind them, leaving only the vast darkness of interstellar space and the growing certainty that the galaxy was about to change in ways none of them could imagine. In his private quarters aboard the Apex's Fury, Thexvol composed his report to the Korthak High Command and the Galactic Council. He described the humans' capabilities, their philosophy, their offer of alliance, but he found himself struggling to convey the most important truth he had discovered. The age of apex predators was ending. The age of adaptation had begun. And somewhere beyond the galactic rim, something was coming that would test everything they thought they knew about survival. The real war, Thexvol realized, hadn't even started yet. 2 years later, the threat Admiral Adams had warned about announced itself with the systematic annihilation of the Outer Rim colonies. Thexvol was aboard the orbital station New Brutus when the first reports arrived. He had been serving as liaison between the Korthak military and the growing human alliance, a position that had fundamentally changed his understanding of warfare. The past 2 years had been a revelation. Watching human advisors transform Korthak combat doctrine, while Korthak warriors taught humans the deeper aspects of predatory instinct. But nothing had prepared him for this. "Admiral Adams to all Alliance commanders," came the transmission from Earth. "Priority Alpha emergency. Proceed immediately to designated rally points. This is not a drill." The tactical display in the station's command center flickered to life, showing the galactic rim where 3 entire star systems had simply vanished. Not destroyed, not conquered, erased from existence as if they had never been. "By the ancestors," breathed War Captain Drakmon, who had become Thexvol's second-in-command in this new hybrid force structure. "What kind of weapon can eliminate entire star systems?" The answer came from Captain Jake Thomas, who had been overseeing joint training exercises in the system. His voice carried across the comm with the controlled urgency that had become his trademark. "All ships, this is Thomas. We've got visual confirmation of the threat. They're calling themselves the Devourers, and they're exactly as advertised. Uploading tactical data now." The display resolved into images that defied comprehension. Ships the size of moons, constructed from what appeared to be living metal that shifted and flowed like liquid mercury. Behind them came smaller vessels, though smaller was relative when dealing with craft that dwarfed the largest human dreadnoughts. But it was the footage of their attack methodology that sent chills through every warrior present. The Devourers didn't simply destroy planets, they consumed them, breaking down matter at the molecular level and incorporating it into their ever-growing fleet. Entire civilizations vanished into the maw of an enemy that grew stronger with every victory. "Estimated time to core worlds." Admiral Adams' voice cut through the shocked silence. "At current rate of advance, 18 months to the first major population centers," Thomas replied. "But sir, there's something else. They're not following standard invasion patterns. Instead of securing territory, they're strip mining everything in their path. They're not here to conquer, they're here to consume." Thexvol felt a familiar chill, the same sensation he'd experienced when first encountering human tactical doctrine. Here was an enemy that operated by entirely different rules, one that couldn't be negotiated with, couldn't be reasoned with, and apparently couldn't be stopped by conventional means. "All Alliance forces to Terra Station," Adams commanded. "We're implementing Omega Protocol." Omega Protocol. Thexvol had heard whispers of it during the past 2 years, but had never been briefed on the details. From the expressions of the human personnel around him, it was clearly something significant. The journey to Terra Station took 3 days, during which time reports continued to flow in from the galactic rim. The Devourers were accelerating, their consumption of matter apparently fueling faster than light travel that defied known physics. Worse, they were learning. Early encounters showed them adapting to each new defensive strategy within hours of first contact. Terra Station was humanity's crown jewel, a massive orbital construct that served as both military headquarters and research facility. As Thexvol's ship approached, he could see representatives from dozens of species arriving: Zephyrians, Draconics, Stellar Brotherhood, and species he didn't even recognize. The entire human alliance was converging on this single point. Admiral Adams met them at the docking bay, but Thexvol noted immediately that the human commander looked older, more careworn than he had 2 years ago. The weight of responsibility for an entire galaxy's survival was clearly taking its toll. "Commander Thexvol, good to see you," Adams said, clasping the Korthak's massive hand in greeting. "I'm afraid the situation has deteriorated faster than our worst-case projections." "What is Omega Protocol?" Thexvol asked without preamble. Adams's expression grew grim. "Something we hoped we'd never have to use. Come on, I'll show you." They moved through corridors filled with beings from across the galaxy, all wearing the same expression of controlled desperation. This wasn't a military conference. It was a war council for the survival of all known life. chamber was vast enough to accommodate representatives from species of every size and physiology. At its center, Captain Thomas stood before a holographic display that showed the current tactical situation. The map was sobering. Nearly a tenth of the galaxy's rim had already been consumed, with the Devourer fleet continuing its inexorable advance toward the core worlds. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings," Thomas began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, "we are facing an extinction-level event. Standard defensive strategies have proven ineffective. The enemy adapts too quickly, consumes too efficiently, and grows stronger with every encounter." He gestured to the display, which zoomed in on recent battle sites. The Corvani Deep Fleet made a stand at Epsilon Centauri, 1,200 ships, including some of the finest weapons platforms in known space. They lasted 17 minutes. The Devourer force that emerged from that engagement was 40% larger than the one that went in. A murmur of despair rippled through the assembled representatives. Thexavol recognized the reaction. He had seen it before when species first encountered the overwhelming superiority of Korthak forces. But this was different. The Devourers weren't just superior, they were antithetical to the very concept of survival. "However," Thomas continued, and his tone shifted to something Thexavol had learned to recognize as distinctly human, the note of someone who had found a solution to an impossible problem, "we believe we have identified a fundamental weakness in their operational strategy." The display changed, showing detailed analysis of Devourer combat patterns. They adapt by consuming and analyzing enemy technology. Every ship they destroy, every world they devour, teaches them new capabilities. But this adaptation process requires integration time, approximately 6 hours for small technological advances, up to several days for major innovations. Admiral Adams stepped forward to join Thomas at the display. "The question becomes, how do you fight an enemy that learns from every encounter? The answer is that you don't fight them with technology at all." The display shifted again, showing what appeared to be human fleet compositions from recent months. But something was wrong with the data. The ships looked primitive, almost archaic compared to the advanced vessels Thexavol had observed during his time with the Alliance. "For the past year," Adams continued, "we've been secretly retrofitting our entire fleet, removing advanced systems, replacing quantum computers with mechanical calculators, switching from energy weapons to kinetic projectiles. We've been deliberately making ourselves less advanced." "That's insane," said General Korvac of the Draconic Hegemony. "You're handicapping yourselves against a superior enemy." Thomas smiled, not his usual predatory grin, but something warmer, more human. "We're not handicapping ourselves. We're becoming invisible." The display showed combat simulations of primitive human ships engaging Devourer forces. The results were catastrophic for the humans, ship after ship destroyed with contemptuous ease. But then Thomas highlighted a crucial detail. "Watch the Devourer adaptation patterns," he said. "After encountering our primitive technology, they optimize their systems for fighting similar threats. Their adaptive algorithms assume they're facing a less advanced civilization and configure accordingly." The simulation ran again, but this time showed a second wave of human ships, still primitive by galactic standards, but employing entirely different technologies. Chemical rockets instead of fusion drives, guided missiles instead of smart munitions, armor plating instead of energy shields. "Every encounter teaches them to fight the last technology they faced," Adams explained. "But if that technology keeps changing, not advancing, but changing, they can't maintain optimization for all variants simultaneously." Thexavol began to see the shape of the strategy. "You're going to hit them with a constantly shifting array of obsolete technologies." "Not just obsolete," Thomas corrected. "Abandoned. Every species in this chamber has evolutionary dead ends in their technological development, things they tried and discarded in favor of better solutions. We've been collecting those dead ends, perfecting them, and building fleets around them. The display now showed the true scope of the human plan. Dozens of different fleet compositions, each built around different technological paradigms. Chemical propulsion fleets, electromagnetic warfare squadrons, kinetic bombardment platforms, even ships that relied on stellar winds for movement. The Zephyrians contributed their early attempts at thought-controlled weapons, Adams continued. The Draconics provided designs for biomechanical hybrids. The Korthak shared their experiments with gravity manipulation, every failed technology from every species in the Alliance. Drachman leaned forward. But these technologies were abandoned for good reasons. They're inefficient, unreliable, limited. Exactly, Thomas said. They're everything the devourers won't expect. An enemy that adapts by consumption can't adapt to something it's never consumed before. The briefing continued for hours, revealing the staggering scope of humanity's preparation. They hadn't just been building fleets, they'd been building an entire alternative technological civilization. Hidden shipyards constructed vessels using forgotten principles. Research stations had perfected weapons based on discarded theories. Entire worlds had been converted to manufacturing facilities for obsolete ammunition. But it was the final revelation that truly demonstrated the audacity of human thinking. The Omega Protocol itself, Adams said, calling up a new display, is based on the ultimate technological dead end, biological warfare. Not disease or poison, but weaponized evolution itself. The display showed what appeared to be modified human vessels, but with organic components integrated into their structure. Living ships that could adapt and change in real time, but through biological processes rather than technological ones. Captain Alex Morgan has been leading a classified program to develop symbiotic vessels, Adams continued. Ships that grow rather than being built, that evolve rather than being programmed. They use biological adaptation to counter technological adaptation. A new figure stepped forward, Captain Morgan, a lean man with eyes that held depths of knowledge that seemed almost alien. The vessels exist in a state of controlled mutation, he explained. Each ship is unique, with capabilities that shift from engagement to engagement. The devourers can't adapt to them because they're constantly adapting to themselves. Thexvol stared at the display, trying to process the implications. You've created evolution as a weapon. We've created uncertainty as a weapon, Morgan corrected. The devourers' strength is their ability to process and counter known threats. But you can't counter something that doesn't follow consistent rules. The assembled representatives spent the next several days reviewing detailed battle plans. The strategy was unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of trying to match the enemy's strength, humanity was deliberately embracing weakness, inconsistency, and obsolescence as tactical advantages. But it was during a private meeting with Admiral Adams that Thexvol finally understood the true scope of what the humans had accomplished. You didn't just prepare for this specific threat, he said. You prepared for the concept of overwhelming superiority itself. Adams nodded slowly. Every apex predator eventually meets something that makes it prey. When that happened to us, we learned that survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. It's about being the most adaptable. But this strategy, Thexvol gestured toward the tactical displays that filled Adams's office, if it fails, you'll have deliberately weakened the galaxy's defenses. If it fails, Adams replied quietly, the galaxy's defenses wouldn't have mattered anyway. The devourers consume everything, advanced or primitive, strong or weak. Our only advantage is that they've never encountered a species that voluntarily embraces primitivism as a survival strategy. The first engagement came 6 weeks later at the Proxima defense grid. Thexvol was aboard the command vessel Adaptation, one of Captain Morgan's bioships, watching as the Devourer fleet approached. The enemy formation was massive, hundreds of moon-sized vessels accompanied by swarms of smaller craft. The human defensive fleet that rose to meet them looked pathetic by comparison. Chemical propulsion fighters that belonged in a museum, kinetic weapons platforms that fired solid metal projectiles, ships with crews instead of AI, weapons that required manual targeting, armor made from actual metal instead of force fields. "All ships, this is Thomas," came the transmission from the fleet's flagship. "Remember, we're not trying to win. We're trying to teach them to lose." The battle was exactly what it appeared to be: a massacre. The primitive human fleet was systematically destroyed by devourer forces that barely seemed to notice the resistance. But Thexvol, watching from the bioship's organic sensor arrays, began to see the pattern. "They're cataloging everything," Captain Morgan observed, his hands moving across control surfaces that looked more like living tissue than metal. Every weapon system, every defensive measure, every tactical maneuver, building counter-strategies in real time. The Devourer fleet completed its analysis and prepared to continue its advance. According to their calculations, they had encountered and neutralized the human alliance's defensive capabilities. They were now optimized to counter primitive chemical propulsion, kinetic weapons, and manual targeting systems. That was when the second wave arrived. The ships that emerged from hyperspace looked nothing like the first fleet. These vessels used magnetic field propulsion, plasma weapons, and biological targeting systems. Technologies that were completely unrelated to what the Devourers had just countered. "Wave 2, this is Captain Sarah Adams," came the transmission from the new fleet's commander. Vexavol noted that she shared Admiral Adams's surname, probably his daughter or niece, another example of human adaptability extending across generations. Beginning electromagnetic warfare protocols. This battle lasted longer, but the result was similarly predictable. The Devourers adapted, learned, and overcame. But now they were optimized for two completely different technological paradigms, which reduced their effectiveness against both. Wave 3 brought gravitational weapons. Wave 4 used sonic disruptors. Wave 5 employed temporal distortion fields, technology so exotic that even the humans weren't entirely sure how it worked. By the time Wave 10 arrived, the Devourer fleet was struggling. Their adaptive systems were overloaded, trying to maintain countermeasures for dozens of incompatible technologies simultaneously. They were still winning individual engagements, but their efficiency was dropping with each encounter. "Omega Wave, this is Morgan," Captain Morgan announced as the bioships finally engaged, beginning evolutionary combat protocols. The living vessels moved like nothing Thexvol had ever seen. They flowed through space like creatures swimming through ocean depths, their configurations shifting constantly. Weapons emerged from hulls and dissolved back into organic matter. Armor hardened and softened in response to incoming fire. Each ship was unique, its capabilities changing moment by moment. The Devourers tried to adapt, but there was nothing consistent to adapt to. Every time their analysis systems identified a pattern, the bioships evolved something new. It was like trying to punch a cloud or shoot at smoke. For the first time since their arrival, the Devourer advance slowed. "All fleets, this is Admiral Adams," came the transmission from Terra Station. "Phase 2 is now in effect. Begin leapfrog protocols." What followed was the most complex military operation in galactic history. Instead of trying to defeat the Devourers in direct combat, the Alliance began a fighting retreat that spanned dozens of star systems. Each engagement introduced new technologies, new tactics, new approaches to warfare. Steam-powered ships gave way to solar sail fleets, which gave way to vessels powered by controlled black holes. The Devourers won every battle, but they were learning to fight a war that kept changing its rules. Their adaptive capabilities, overwhelmed by constant novelty, began to fail. They started making mistakes, small at first, then larger. The turning point came at the Battle of Kepler Station, where Captain Thomas led a fleet of ships powered by what he called aggressive friendship drives. Vessels that moved by forming emotional bonds with local space-time. It was such an absurd concept that even the humans weren't sure it would work. It didn't work in any conventional sense. The ships barely functioned. Their weapons were largely ineffective, and their defenses were laughable. But the devourers, confronted with technology based on principles they couldn't comprehend, experienced something unprecedented in their existence: confusion. For 17 minutes, the mighty devourer fleet simply stopped, hanging motionless in space while their analytical systems tried to process the impossible. When they finally resumed their advance, their formation was noticeably less coordinated. "They're experiencing cognitive dissonance," Captain Morgan reported from his bio-ship, which had grown additional sensor organs to monitor the engagement. "Their adaptive systems are starting to reject input that doesn't fit their conceptual framework." Admiral Adams's voice carried a note of quiet satisfaction. "Then it's time for the final lesson." The last phase of humanity's strategy was the simplest and most complex. Instead of introducing new technologies, they began combining the old ones in impossible ways: ships that used chemical propulsion for interstellar travel and gravitational manipulation for weapons targeting. Fleets, where individual vessels operated on completely different technological principles but somehow coordinated perfectly. The coup de grace came when Captain Thomas's flagship, a vessel that somehow combined steam power, quantum computing, biological growth systems, and temporal distortion in a configuration that should have been physically impossible, flew directly into the heart of the Devourer formation. "This is Thomas," he transmitted as energy weapons tore at his ship's nonsensical defenses. "I'd like to take a moment to thank you for teaching us the most important lesson of all." The Devourer fleet converged on his position, determined to eliminate this incomprehensible threat. "You taught us that adaptation isn't about becoming stronger," Thomas continued, his ship somehow continuing to function despite damage that should have destroyed it instantly. "It's about becoming more." Thomas's ship exploded in a cascade of energies that belonged to at least 6 different technological paradigms. The blast shouldn't have been particularly damaging to vessels designed to consume stars. But the Devourer's adaptive systems, already overloaded by months of impossible encounters, finally experienced complete failure when confronted with an explosion that operated according to mutually contradictory physical laws. The effect cascaded through their fleet as each ship's attempt to analyze the blast transmitted the logical paradox to its neighbors. One by one, the moon-sized vessels began to shut down, their adaptive systems locked in infinite loops trying to process the impossible. Within hours, the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced was reduced to derelict hulks drifting in space, their crews trapped inside vessels that could no longer function. The aftermath of the Devourer War, as historians would later call it, fundamentally changed galactic civilization. The human alliance had not merely defeated an overwhelming enemy, they had done so by demonstrating that intelligence itself could be weaponized against superiority. Thexavol stood in Admiral Adams's office aboard Terra Station, looking out at the vast repair operations underway throughout the system. Devourer hulks were being carefully studied and dismantled, their technologies analyzed and, inevitably, adapted for peaceful purposes. "You realize," he said to the human admiral, "that you've made every species in the galaxy obsolete." Adams looked up from his reports, raising an eyebrow. "How so?" "The old model of advancement, becoming more sophisticated, more powerful, more efficient, it's meaningless now. You've proven that the ultimate advancement is the ability to voluntarily become less advanced." Adams smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Commander, that's been humanity's greatest discovery from the beginning. True strength isn't about what you can become, it's about what you're willing to sacrifice to protect what matters. And what matters to humans." everything else. Adams gestured toward the viewport, where ships from dozens of species worked together to rebuild and repair. Every species, every culture, every possibility for growth and change and discovery. We didn't defeat the devourers to prove human superiority. We defeated them to preserve diversity itself. Thexvol considered this, thinking about everything he had learned over the past few years. The Korthak have a concept, the final hunt. The idea that every predator will eventually face prey that transforms them from hunter to hunted. And I think humans are the galaxy's final hunt. Not because you're more dangerous than everything else, but because you make everything else more dangerous. Every species that encounters you becomes more than they were. Adams was quiet for a long moment. That might be the most profound compliment anyone has ever given us. As Thexvol prepared to return to Korthak space, now formally integrated into the Human Alliance as an autonomous member, he reflected on the transformation his own species had undergone. The Korthak were still apex predators, still among the galaxy's finest warriors, but they were no longer defined by what they could destroy. Instead, they had learned to be defined by what they could protect. The final irony, Thexvol realized, was that in teaching the galaxy how to defeat an overwhelming enemy, humans had created the only force that could have threatened their own dominance. The alliance they had built was now powerful enough to challenge humanity itself, equipped with all the adaptive techniques and philosophical insights that made humans so formidable. But that, he understood, had been the point all along. True apex predators didn't create prey, they created equals. As his ship departed Terra Station, Thexvol composed his final report on human capabilities. But unlike his previous assessments, this one would remain classified, locked away in Korthak archives as a reminder of the most important lesson his species had ever learned. In a universe where survival meant constant change, the greatest strength was knowing when to stop being strong. The galaxy was safe, not because its greatest threat had been defeated, but because its greatest teachers had shown everyone how to defeat themselves. And in that paradox, Thexvol finally understood what it truly meant to be human.